Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about some resources and stuff you can do and learn before you start a computer science course. This will cover stuff from coding to learning how to use Git and GitHub, Linux, etc. So first of all, let's talk about coding. Obviously, you'll be using a lot of coding, and it's great to start learning how to code before you start your course. There are so many resources available. I'll share some of those down below. So for beginners, I usually recommend learning Python. It's a very easy to learn, easy to read programming language. That's why I usually recommend it. You don't need to learn everything about the language. There's a few things that I usually recommend, which are basic data types, conditions and Boolean expressions, loops, functions, lists, dictionaries and sets. And then if you want to go a little bit deeper, you can also learn about input and output from files and classes. This will give you a broad review of how to code, particularly in Python, and the knowledge you'll get from learning how to code in Python will most of it translate to other languages as well. So you're not constrained to the logic in this language in particular. If you also want to go a little bit further, you can also learn the basics of C. This is a low-level programming language and it's very widely used. It's been around for multiple decades and it's still very widely used. Some people say it's a bit outdated, but it's definitely a good introduction to low-level programming languages. So if you have some extra time and you want to explore a little bit further programming languages, I'd recommend learning a little bit about C. There are multiple resources online. It's not difficult to find. So now you are going to learn how to code. Where do you write the code? Code is basically just text. So technically you can write it in a notepad, or you can technically write it by hand. You can write it on you can write it on Word if you want to, but I usually recommend Visual Studio Code. It's very easy to start using it. It's not too complicated. There are multiple resources on how to get started. I'll link some down below. It's very lightweight. It's available on every platform, so that would be Windows, Mac, Linux, etc. If you want something more powerful, you can always use IntelliJ IDEA. This is a proper IDE with multiple functions and it's very widely used. It has some more features than Visual Studio Code has, but if you're just learning how to code, I'd stick to Visual Studio Code. If you know already and you want to try something new, IntelliJ IDEA would be something good to try out. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to talk about is operating systems. So most of you probably are using Windows, and is not great for programming. It has a lot of disadvantages, and most likely if you're doing a computer science course, you'll quickly realize that Windows is not going to do it. You'll most likely end up needing Linux or an equivalent Unix machine. So just kind of a short overview about it. There are two main types of operating systems. There's Windows types of operating systems and there's Unix types of operating systems. The two main types from Unix are the Mac type and the Linux type. If they're based on Unix, so both Mac and Linux, they're more than great for programming. You'll have no trouble. Windows not so much. It has lots of problems and commands are different and it's just kind of a mess. So if you own a Windows machine, you'll most likely need to have some kind of Linux or Unix based system to work on it. If you have a Mac OS machine, then you don't need to worry about this part because most of the stuff on the Mac OS is exactly the same as it is on Linux because it is also a Unix operating system. Although some people still prefer that you use Linux because it has some differences, it's good to have some knowledge of it, and if you want to try it on virtual machines, that is also good. So you can give it a look, but it's not that much of a big deal unless you have a Windows machine. Don't sweat it already. There are various types of resources that you can use to have a Unix environment, and I'll share some with you. So the first thing that you can do if you have a Windows machine is download the Ubuntu terminal. So this would be a small representation of Ubuntu, which is a Linux distribution, on Windows itself. Basically, you'll still have everything on Windows, but it'll be kind of having a small virtual machine that what's inside it, just as a terminal, and you can do most of the commands there if it just runs on Linux. This will be a very short and quick way of getting around it. It also, I know some people that got through first year with just the Ubuntu terminal, so it's definitely doable. I don't know if it's exactly the best practice, because learning how to use Linux is very important for computer scientists. But if you just want a quick solution and you just want to get started, for example, then definitely give this a try. It's on the Microsoft Store, so you can just download it directly to your computer. If you want to go a bit further, you can actually install Ubuntu. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to get rid of Windows. You can install both side by side in your machine. If you have low storage in your machine, I don't recommend this, because it will take some space for the Ubuntu part. But if you have some space and you want to give this a proper try and actually try a different operating system rather than Windows and try an open source one, then installing Ubuntu will be a very good idea. I'm recommending Ubuntu because it is very beginner friendly. There are loads of questions answered online with different bugs and problems resolved. So if you don't know anything about Linux, I usually say try Ubuntu, because you'll find an answer to everything online. There's no need to be scared about it. A third option is to install Ubuntu on a USB drive. This is also very useful if you just want to have it on the go and you don't want to put it on a machine. You can also install it on a USB drive. The only thing is that to get to it, you need to use the BIOS when you turn on your computer and choose the USB drive. It's not too hard. There are various tutorials online. So if you don't have space on your machine, you still want to try the operating system fully, then installing it on a USB drive is definitely an option. Another option that you have is to install a virtual machine. I'll leave this tutorial on the links below, but basically you can have a small computer inside your computer running virtually a Linux operating system. The only thing is that the performance is not going to be as good as if you would run Windows or Linux directly on your computer, but it's definitely doable if you want to try the operating system. It's also a very good idea if you want to try it out before you install it. The last thing that I'm going to talk about the Linux operating systems is that you can install other distributions other than Ubuntu. I usually recommend Ubuntu because it's very beginner friendly, as I've said before, but there are other distributions that are also very beginner friendly, like Manjaro, for example. So another big thing about learning computer science is learning how to use the terminal or the command prompt. You'll be needing it most likely for loads of your projects, and it's very useful if you know the basic commands. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is Git and GitHub. This will be the main thing, and it's one of the hardest things to learn about. It'll be very useful if you spend some time learning about this. So first, starting with Git. What is Git? Git is a version control system. So basically it's just a software that records any changes or a history of the changes in a file. So for example, you're working on some code and you have it working perfectly, but you want to add something somewhere. So what you can do is save that state of the file using Git, and then do your changes, and then save those changes. If the changes go wrong and you actually end up ruining your code and you need to go back to what you had written before, you don't have to remember how it was before. You can just go back to how your code was before using Git. This is very useful if you're coding. It's very, very good practice to always updating all your changes into Git to ensure that you don't lose any code that you're writing. Alongside Git, you'll also be using GitHub, and GitHub is a Git hosting service. Basically what this is a cloud for Git. So you have all the history of your files saved in your computer. You can then push all those changes into GitHub, and then you can have it on this cloud that you can access from any computer. And if something goes wrong with your computer, you can always access it. It's also very good to share code with other people. So GitHub is quite difficult to grasp in the beginning, and I still don't know a lot about GitHub. I know the basics of it. but I'll leave a resource that I found, which is a beginner's introduction to Git and GitHub. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is just extra resources. Honestly, the best resource that you have is the internet. You probably already know this, but there's so much information online, especially for computer science. The only thing that I'm going to mention other than the internet is a book that I've been recommended by a lot of people, which is Cracking the Coding Interview. This book has been recommended by so many people, and it's very good if you're planning about applying to jobs as a computer scientist or a software developer, if you need to do a technical interview where you have to code. But other than that, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Please let me know in the comments down below if there's something else that you want me to go more in depth into. If you have some doubts about what I said, please feel free to comment down below. I'm more than happy to clarify it. Feel free to also message me on my socials. And if you want to see more videos, subscribe, click the bell. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Bye!